Hi, my name is Katherine Durkin, and today we'll be discussing cardiovascular disease, and I will be talking about the background and giving you a literary review of CVD's known risk factors. So most people take for granted a healthy heart, yet in reality, CVD is one of the world's most prevalent and expensive pandemics. According to the World Health Organization in March of 2013, CVDs are the #1 cause of death globally. On average, 16.7 million people die from CVD annually. As this chart shows, ischemic heart disease, stroke, and COPD are in the top 4 leading cause of death between 2000 and 2011. It remains a leading cause of death within the past decade. So let's get a background of CVD and actually define what CVD is. Cardiovascular disease, or heart disease, is an umbrella term used to describe a wide range of malfunctions, abnormalities, and diseases that affect the heart and or blood vessels. So I have a picture of a healthy heart, and you can see all the different muscles and blood vessels that run through your heart, and CVD can affect all these various muscles and blood vessels. And each different type of cardiovascular disease affects different parts of the heart. So let's talk about types of heart disease. This chart has various types of heart disease. Some are congenital, that means you're born with, and others are developed through atherosclerosis, which is a long time process of development for CVD. The most common form of CVD is coronary heart disease, which on average kills 385,000 Americans per year and costs around $108.9 million. So why is CVD a critical issue in the United States? It's a critical issue because cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death for both male and female Americans. As the chart shows, Americans between the ages of 60 and 79 have a 70.5 chance of getting CVD. On average, 1 in 3 Americans will have CVD. That equates to around 71 million people in the United States having one or more forms of CVD. Let's talk about the extent of CVD in the United States. According to the American Heart Association, the prevalence of CVD for Americans between the ages of 60 and 79 is 70.5%. And for Americans over the age of 80, the prevalence rate for CVD is 85%, which is very significant and high. When we look at the incidence rate of CVD in the United States, for Americans between the ages of 65 and 74, the incidence rate is 44.6%. And for Americans between the ages of 75 and 84 is 49.7%. So what are the critical issues surrounding CVD? Scientists have discovered that CVD is caused by a combination of controllable and non-controllable risk factors. However, experts estimate that CVD is largely preventable. Different studies account different percentages to how much is preventable. So this chart shows risk factors that can be controlled, and the very first risk factor that you can control is high blood pressure. Other things can include high cholesterol, diabetes, tobacco use, unhealthy diet, eating a healthy diet, and exercising. Another critical issue concerning CVD, alongside with an increased public awareness, there is also increased negative risk behaviors associated with CVD, like the trend of obesity in the United States. So people are wondering why we're becoming more aware of the risk factors, negative risk factors / health behaviors associated with CVD, yet these trends are continuing to rise. So on the screen I have a picture of heart attack prevention. It says easy as ABC: avoid tobacco, become more active, and choose good nutrition. And the other campaign I have along the bottom, Coke is actually partners with the American Heart Association and will, for a certain amount of months, will actually have a separate label featuring a heart and the logo brand, so that more people will get familiar with this campaign. So all this increased awareness, and yet trends that the risk factors associated with CVD are increasing as well, led our group to our scientific process and led eventually to our research question, which is, why do Americans ignore the risk factors and behaviors that are associated or related to cardiovascular disease? So when we were trying to come up with an answer to this question, we thought about prior health knowledge and how it focused on curative medicine and often failed to focus on preventative measures for this pandemic. Therefore, we came to the theory that a large amount of the general public may not have a true understanding of primary prevention, choosing preventative health behaviors. So this slide shows us the scheme of prevention, and as we can see back here at C, this is the traditional curative medicine that takes place in the tertiary prevention, which is after a beginning of symptoms, which obviously must happen after you've already contracted an illness. So our group thought that maybe because this is where traditional medicine emphasized after the actual incurring of the illness, that the general public is not aware. If they actually focus on this primary prevention, they can limit their exposure to the illness to begin with. So this is how that ties into our theory. After we came up with this theory, we decided to come up with a hypothesis. Our group hopes to reconfirm risk factors associated with CVD so people can establish preventative action plans for cardiovascular disease. The variables that our group chose to study were unhealthy lifestyle, smoking, and physical environment. My colleagues will explain further with how these risk factors are associated with CVD.
Hello, my name is Veronica, and the factor that I am going to be dealing with is unhealthy lifestyle being one of the factors that causes cardiovascular disease. The hypothesis that our group decided to do with unhealthy lifestyle is that cardiovascular disease is caused by an unhealthy lifestyle, including like an unhealthy diet, high LDL, cholesterol, and a lack of physical activity. Found this chart from the Center of Health Statistics data from 2007 to 2010 for the age group of 20 to 39. Basically, fast food consumed was much greater than any of the other groups. We compared that information with the data set from Chase that concluded how many times was fast food consumed in the past week. Males and females at least ate once, 25% out of like the 40. And this was all just in the state of California. We then concluded that high consumption of sodium that's actually in the fast food or like processed foods also contained a lot of saturated fat that would increase the levels of high LDL cholesterol, which is a bad cholesterol that clogs up your arteries. So we assumed that if high levels of sodium in the fast food were being consumed in a greater amount within the past couple of decades, then also the same thing would be occurring to the high levels of LDL cholesterol in adults. So this chart basically bases on the age group of 40 to 74 years old, but the trend is actually lowered 50% from the year 1976 to the year 2010. We compare this to a data set from 2005 of Chase of how many individuals were actually diagnosed with having high blood cholesterol. And if you see in the red is basically both male and female were found to have no high blood cholesterol, and like less than 30% were found to be diagnosed with having high blood cholesterol. So then we kind of questioned as to like how is it that LDL is not being increased when there's a high consumption of sodium and saturated fat that's being consumed with the fast food? We recognize that LDL cholesterol is not only influenced badly, but it can also be influenced in a good way that decreases the amount of LDL. Cholesterol can be affected in a way that if an individual exercises or includes physical activities in their life, they can decrease the amount of LDL. So, based on the American Heart Association, they recommend an individual to exercise at least 150 minutes per week of moderate exercise, which is a total of like 2 hours and 30 minutes, or 25 minutes per week of vigorous exercise, which is like an hour and 15 minutes. As to how much individuals in the Fresno County and San Joaquin Valley actually exercise, and we actually concluded that both the male and female, at 45%, actually included physical activity as part of their lifestyle, which would then actually be like a big decrease in LDL. With all this information, we concluded that based on the data information that was evaluated throughout this PowerPoint, there does seem to be a correlation between high levels of sodium consumed, especially through the fast food, and the increase of LDL cholesterol and the heart disease. However, based on the data retrieved, regular physical activity, or like exercise, excluding walking, seem to be the alternative way to lower LDL cholesterol and the chance of developing heart disease. We also focused on the factor of smoking, the use of tobacco, being a factor of cardiovascular disease. Our hypothesis for this was that smoking or the use of tobacco is a factor that contributes to the cardiovascular disease. Or just cut this part, Kate. Our hypothesis for this factor is that smoking or the use of tobacco is a factor that contributes to cardiovascular disease. According to Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, abbreviated MMWR, in 2008, about 443,000 U.S. deaths attributable to each year were caused by cigarette smoking. That portion is this kind of brown spot right here, also like stroke, which was a total of 126,000 deaths. For stroke, it was 15,900. According to the World Health Organization, WHO, smoking is a leading cause of cardiovascular disease, causing around 25,000 deaths per year. Let me just start over. Cut this part too. According to the World Health Organization, WHO, smoking is a leading cause of cardiovascular disease, causing around 25,000 deaths per year from the heart and circulatory disease. American Council on Science and Health in 1996 observed cut this part. The American Council on Science and Health in 1996 observed the rising heart rate associated with tobacco use and concluded that the heart rate can increase by 30% during the first 10 minutes of smoking. So that's basically the amount of time that it takes for a person to actually start noticing like results as soon as they light and start smoking the cigarette. We then decided to go to Chase and we retrieved this data set. The geographic area that was used was San Joaquin Valley, and it was to retrieve information regarding smoking status from current, former, and never smoking individuals. The most important information is basically like a current smoker that has heart disease was like 19%, and the former smokers who have obviously been or have quit smoking, but also resulted in heart disease was 42%. So that is very important because the rates in the San Joaquin Valley, and this data set is from the year 2003. I think you can have to cut this one because I kind of came out of the stupid slide. Okay, we retrieved this data set from Chase. The geographic area was the San Joaquin Valley. The topic was the smoking status from current, former, and never smoking individuals in that geographic area. The most important part is these current smokers, 19% actually seem to have heart disease. Former smokers, 42% actually seem to have heart disease, and this data set was from the year 2003. That is a really high rate, especially here in the Valley, where also just cut that piece off. I don't think we need it. We also retrieved a data set from Chase for the year 2011-2012. This is a data set right here indicating like the prevalence of smokers who actually showed to smoke to have a heart disease or symptoms of them or have been diagnosed. We then constructed a 2x2 table which showed the amount of smoker combined with current and former was 94,000 that actually has been diagnosed with cardiovascular. Cut that piece out. I don't know, my stupid ear itched. Stupid. So we also made a 2x2 table just to indicate the amount of prevalence that a smoker combined with current and former smokers actually the amount of people who actually had cardiovascular disease within the San Joaquin Valley. And it showed to be 94,000 individuals that actually were diagnosed with heart disease. Non-smokers that actually had heart disease was 90,000, which was pretty high. I think that's... Give me a second. Cut this one too. To that part where it was important. Just cut the whole piece and I'm going to just say this part again. The relative ratio came out to be 1.55, and that smoking is associated with cardiovascular disease. Since it was higher than 1, then it is basically associated with the disease. We also calculated the odds ratio by doing similar calculation. The odds ratio came out to be 1.63, which also is higher than 1, making that cardiovascular disease is actually indeed associated with smoking. We then focused on two main chemicals. The two main chemicals that we focused on are nicotine, which stimulates the body to produce adrenaline that makes the heart beat faster and rise blood pressure. This basically makes your heart pump faster. That basically enlarges also makes your walls thicker because it has to make your heart pump the whole amount of blood in a faster rate. The second chemical that we focused on was carbon monoxide, which it attaches itself to hemoglobin much easier than oxygen does. Cut that piece. We also focused on carbon monoxide, which attaches itself to hemoglobin much more easier than oxygen, decreasing the amount of oxygen available to the tissue. We found that there was a trend that was decreasing from the year 1965 adults to the year 2011. The trend was actually decreasing, whereas for students from the year 1989, the trend slightly increased, but then decreased to 2011 to be similar than that of adults. So there is a trend stating that the amount of smoking has been decreasing in the United States. Another factor, basically, or another trend that we found, cut that place out because didn't start really. Another chart that we found was this one that gives us information way back from 1960 all the way to 2000. For smoking, you can tell that there has been a trend that has shown that the amount of cigarettes being consumed or cardiovascular being a risk factor in the U.S. population has decreased, along with the cigarette consumption has been decreasing from the year 1960 all the way to 2000. So it's been decreasing for like at least 10%, which is a great amount from the population of the United States. A lot of just cut the whole part. All of the cigarette, or most of the cigarette packets, let me pause, cut it from there on. Most of the cigarette packets contain this warning message stating Surgeon General's warning, stating that smoking causes lung cancer, heart disease, emphysema, and many complications in pregnancy. This falls back to why is it that individuals continue to smoke when they have been warned, or there's a lot of information regarding that cardiovascular disease is indeed tied to or being a factor that just stop. I freaking lost my. The warning on cigarette packets. Surgeon General's warnings consist of this: smoking causes skin cancer. Okay. The warning on cigarette packets. Surgeon General's warning states simply this: smoking causes lung cancer, heart disease, emphysema, and many complications in pregnancy. This goes back to our hypothesis as a group stating why is it that individuals continue to consume cigarettes continue to consume cigarettes if it is labeled even on the packet stating that heart disease is one of the contributing diseases if you smoke. The results for this factor is even though that cigarette smoking rates have decreased in the past decades, cigarette smoking still has evidence that indicate it is a cause of cardiovascular disease due to the past data. Although a lot of Americans have stopped consuming cigarettes, it's still a prevalence that if the amount of cigarettes actually increases, so would the heart rate or the heart disease will actually show an increase the same way that it has been decreasing in the past several years.
Cardiovascular disease and environmental air pollution. And our proposal here was to find that environmental air pollution is associated to or does contribute to cardiovascular disease risk. And our goal is that there will not be any association or difference. Okay, in background about environmental air pollution is that it is a major source of contributing to cardiovascular disease, and those two are mainly linked to O2 and PM2.5. And this is first found in the Ford Motor versus EPA case, where an association between PM2.5 and ozone was found to be contributed to cardiovascular disease. And you see that most of this association was found in urban areas with the trademark of traffic and highways and stuff like that. And PM2.5 is a main contributor because it is able to enter the circulation through arteries, and it could cause inflammation and obstruction. Inflammation is suspected as it increases blood pressure by a narrowing of the arteries and the venous blood pathways, and that leads to an increased risk in CVD. And obstruction is also suspected as it may block the arteries and venous blood pathway back to the heart, causing, again, CVD risk. Again, as I was mentioning about ozone, it does not itself contribute to CVD, but just sensitizes it to PM2.5 effects on CVD. Okay, and turning to the screen over here, we have the map of the Fresno terrain. And here you see that there is mountain sides over here and other mountain sides over here. And these two mountain sides actually block the whole area of Fresno here, where it creates a bowl and air pollutants settle in this area where Fresno is. And this other map of California focuses on the highways that you see in these red lines. And in this midline of a highway here, I have highlighted some counties that are located along this highway. And these are urban areas where I've looked into this in its contribution to CVD risk. I just want to operationally define that Fresno is a urban area with its rank at number 7 in California, and with 654,000 people as a population. And this is a data comparison of Fresno versus Mariposa. Mariposa is defined as a rural area, and you see these are before on the map where I highlighted or located where they are on the highways. And you can see that Fresno is on the top of here, and it has the most unhealthy days. And you hear other counties that are also urban areas with high numbers of unhealthy days for heart disease. And on the bottom is the rural county where we looked for, and there's no unhealthy days there. Okay, here is the data representation of Fresno and its monthly averages for unhealthy days in Fresno, California. And here we see that the different months, and we still see that these monthly average are pretty high for unhealthy, very unhealthy, and unhealthy for sensitive groups. Versus the next graph here, you see is Mariposa, the rural county, and you see that through the months it still had really low monthly average number of unhealthy days for unhealthy and sensitive groups and very unhealthy. So. Okay, and this is looking into the data for just the recent past year, 2012, and Fresno is located on the second line up here. It's kind of hard to see, but it has one of the leading 40 unhealthy days for heart disease in California altogether. And in CAIS here, or the California Health Institute Survey, it also states, and not also states, but it also shows that heart disease is actually more prevalent in urban areas. If you see the numbers, this is a 10.8% with heart disease living in urban areas, and with the 8.8% that has a heart disease living in rural areas. Here, if you don't see it correctly, this above chart right here doesn't actually show as much as the bottom chart here, where we have just combined urban, rural, and we did a contingency or 2x2 table that will help us locate the relative risk and odds ratio. And this is the raw data, but over here we have the main calculations. You see the main calculation for relative risk, and it gives us a result of 1.23. And for relative risk, as long as it's over greater than 1, then that means there is a risk for future that there will be a 23% more chance of having CVD with people who lives in urban areas. And for the odds ratio, or the OR, the results are 1.25, meaning there has been an association between CVD and urban areas, as long as this number, or our results, it was greater than 1. This table actually shows the same thing, and just more mainly broke down into their own counties, rural and urban counties. And this is our 2x2 table, and over here is our relative risk and odds ratio again. And our results for relative risk was 1.01, and our odds ratio was 1.01 again. And they both says that there is association of CVD to CVD to environmental air pollution in Fresno, California. So our null hypothesis was rejected, as we see that there was a difference, and so our alternative hypothesis, which is our proposal, says that there is a difference and in an increased PM2.5 and ozone that does contribute to CVD in Fresno, California.
Hi, my name is Nicole Gutierrez, and for our group project, my job was to formulate the conclusion by analyzing our group's data. By doing so, I was able to reconfirm our risk factors to CVD. Therefore, I was able to reestablish preventable measures to be taken to reduce the risk and development of CVD. The first risk factor I will be discussing is unhealthy lifestyle due to poor diet and physical inactivity. Through the research, my colleague has found an increased consumption of fast food among Americans. And through that increases sodium levels. And with the increase in sodium levels, it sends a chemical messenger which increases LDL levels. Another result that was found by my colleague was an increase in physical activity in recent years by 50%. So therefore, proving, even though research found LDL levels to decrease in recent years, this increased physical activity can counteract high LDL levels even when fast food is consumed. Some preventable measures one can take to reduce the risk of CED through unhealthy lifestyle is physical inactivity. One can participate in physical activity 30 minutes a day, 7 days a week. This can even be broken up in increments of 10 minutes throughout the day. Also, one can also pick a gym partner to go to the gym with, and which will motivate the individual to be consistent. Another preventable measure would be the consumption of a healthy diet. It is very important that you eat less saturated fat and increase your fiber intake for a healthy digestive system. Also, one can refer to the myplate.gov. As you can see on the slide, it has what you should be eating: the vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and healthy protein. The biggest part on there is the vegetables. That's most important. Moving on, the next risk factor is physical environment and air pollution. From the results, living in urban cities promotes the development of CED over time, and this is through PM and ozone levels. Through PM and ozone levels, this causes inflammation in the blood vessels, limiting blood to the heart, which can cause an increased risk in CVD. Preventable measures that can be taken. So if possible, it is best to live in rural areas and move out of urban cities so you are further away from the PM levels and ozone levels and all the air pollution that is caused by high traffic areas. Another prevention method that was taken in 1970 was the Clean Air Act that the government enacted. The act that regulates air emissions from area, stationary, and mobile sources, as stated from the EPA website. It is also best to walk, ride a bike, or carpool. Our next risk factor is smoking. From the results, we have found that the smoking trend has tended to decrease over the years. Through our CHASE dataset, it does not seem to show the results that we needed to prove our hypothesis to be true. In order to reconfirm this risk factor for CVD, we completed the odd ratio and relative risk. We used the Chase dataset numbers, and it turned out that both the odd ratio and relative risk were over 1, meaning that there was a relationship and risk. Preventable measures that can be taken to prevent smoking are public awareness messages, and these are mostly implemented by government programs and the public health department. They put on TV commercials to mainly target our future, which are the children. And they also focus on special attention to at-risk age groups like teenagers, and they do anti-teen smoking ads. And also I have found that with children, in schools they implement Red Ribbon Week, which is an anti-drug program that does include smoking and alcohol. So at a young age, they are conditioning children to be drug-free, smoke-free, and to live a healthy life. I have included a chart in the trends of cigarette smoking from 1965 to 2011 showing a decrease but also a rise in students, which is why public health departments have implemented these special programs targeting them. So 5 rules to live by to prevent the risk and development of heart disease include keeping blood pressure at 115/75 or less, having LDL levels at 100 or less, having blood sugar at 100 or less, and this is at fasting without any food consumption, and controlling your BMI, and the absence of tobacco. So this concludes our group project of CVD and the risk factors involved.